The dense jungle of planet AA swallowed the last rays of the twin suns, plunging the lush wilderness into an eerie twilight. Mike Carter wiped the sweat from his forehead, cursing the oppressive humidity that had his expedition gear sticking to his skin. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of tracking through this green hell, and all he had to show for it was a data pad full of failed dating profiles. Another rejection, he muttered under his breath, scanning through the latest missive. Some sent-in woman who thought Earthmen were too primitive. At 35, he was starting to think his mother was right. Maybe he should have just settled for someone back home instead of chasing exotic adventures across the galaxy. But then, a distant scream shattered his self-pity. Instinctively, Mike's hand reached for his pulse rifle as he crouched behind a massive fern. The sound came again, definitely humanoid, definitely female, and definitely in trouble. He moved silently through the underbrush, years of ranger training kicking in. He froze at the edge of a small clearing, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the scene. 3 burly Kron raiders. Tough, scaled warriors with bioluminescent patterns running along their hides, dragged a struggling figure between them. But the captive? She was unlike anything Mike had ever seen. A petite woman with flawless blue skin that shimmered in the fading light. Despite her small size, she fought like a wildcat. Every move was graceful, dangerous. "The boss will pay triple for this one," the largest Kron growled. A genuine spirit caller. The woman's voice was musical, even in anger. "Let me go, you scale-faced cowards. My spirits will tear you apart." One of the raiders chuckled. "Your spirits ain't here now, pretty thing." Mike assessed the situation. 3 armed hostiles. 1 civilian. Bad odds, but he'd been in worse. His hand slid into his pack, pulling out a sonic grenade. The explosion sent the raiders reeling, their sensitive hearing overwhelmed. Mike burst from cover, dropping the first raider with a clean shot. Before the second could react, Mike's boot slammed into his face, sending him sprawling. The third, still holding the blue woman, fumbled for his blaster. It was the opening she needed. With one swift move, the petite woman dropped and swept the raider's legs out from under him, her combat style clean and precise. Mike finished him off with a stun blast before he could even try to rise. "You okay?" Mike asked, turning to the woman who was already working to remove the dampening cuffs on her wrists. She looked up at him, her silver eyes widening in horror. "You're human?" Mike blinked. "Last time I checked, yeah. Is that a problem?" She scrambled backward, nearly tripping over a fallen raider. "My sister warned me about your kind. Violent, unstable, mating at random without proper cycles." She gestured accusingly toward his legs. "And the wings on your hips?" "Wings?" Mike couldn't help it. He laughed. "I think there's been some misunderstanding, Mississippi." "Nah," she said cautiously, her voice soft yet commanding. "I know what I know. My distant sister once encountered one of your kind. She told me all about human practices." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Look, nah, I hate to disappoint, but I don't have any wings, hip or otherwise." He holstered his weapon slowly, trying to keep things light. "I just saved you from being sold to who knows where." Na's silver eyes narrowed. Perhaps you want to exchange microbes through mouth contact." Mike nearly choked on his own laughter. "You mean kissing? That's not exactly high on my priority list right now." A distant roar echoed through the jungle, emphasizing his point. Na's head snapped toward the sound, her expression changing from suspicion to concern. "The night hunters are waking. I could control them, but these cursed cuffs..." Na muttered, frustrated. Mike moved cautiously closer, offering help. "Let me get those off. I'm pretty good with tech." She allowed him to approach, though her gaze never left him, wary of his every move like he might suddenly sprout those mythical hip wings. The cuffs were no match for his expertise. With a few deft twists and clicks, they fell away. "Now, about those night hunters." Mike started, but was interrupted by a closer roar. Na's eyes began to glow with an inner light, the silver illumination casting an eerie glow in the darkening jungle. "Perhaps," she said, a smile tugging at her lips, "I should show you what a spirit caller can do, unless you're afraid." Mike grinned back. "I think I'm starting to like your planet's brand of crazy." Together, they moved deeper into the jungle, an unlikely pair, the battle-hardened human ranger and the mystical blue huntress. Somewhere in the darkness, the night hunters were waiting. As they pushed forward, Mike couldn't help but watch Na in awe. Her blue skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her every movement seemed effortless, like a dance through the jungle. Meanwhile, he felt like a clumsy giant. So, he ventured, his voice low. "These night hunters you can control." Na spun around suddenly, pressing a delicate blue finger to his lips. "Humans really do talk too much. Like chattering primates." Mike raised an eyebrow, but stayed silent, trying to ignore the way her touch sent a jolt through him. She withdrew her hand quickly, a darker shade of blue creeping across her cheeks. "The spirits are sacred," she whispered. "They choose who they bond with. My gift is rare. That's why the raiders wanted me." A branch snapped in the darkness, and both froze. Mike's hand went to his rifle, but Na's arm shot out, stopping him. "Wait," she breathed, her eyes glowing again. The low growl that followed from the shadows sent a chill through Mike's spine. A massive shape materialized from the dark, a creature covered in iridescent scales, its 6 legs ending in wickedly curved claws. Its elongated head housed rows of gleaming teeth, but it was the eyes that made Mike freeze. They glowed silver, matching Na's. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Na stepped forward, reaching up to stroke the beast's scaled hide. "This is Tara. She's been following us since we left the clearing." Mike didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. "Beautiful isn't exactly the word I'd use." Typical human response. Na scoffed, glaring at him. "Always afraid of what you don't understand." "Hey, I just saved you," Mike protested. "Give me some credit." Na smirked. "Yes, and then you probably expected me to what? Make out with you in gratitude." Mike laughed. "Your sister seems to have had an interesting experience with humans. But no, I don't expect anything. Though I am curious about these hip wings you keep mentioning." "Don't change the subject," Na snapped, but not before Mike caught the hint of a smile. "We need to reach my village before more raiders come. The jungle isn't safe at night, even for a spirit caller." A shout echoed in the distance, raiders. Their friends had found the bodies of their fallen comrades. "Lead the way," Mike said, gesturing ahead. "Your friend Tara seems like pretty good backup." They moved quickly, Na occasionally stopping to commune with other spirit beasts. Mike found himself torn between watching for threats and watching her. There was something mesmerizing about the way she connected with the creatures, her face serene, her body moving with subtle gestures like a dance. "Stop staring," she snapped suddenly, not even turning around. "I can feel your human eyes boring into me." "Sorry," Mike grinned. "Just trying to spot those wings my kind supposedly has. Thought maybe they were a common feature for all." "Keep dreaming," Na muttered, though Mike noticed her lips twitch into a smile. The jungle swallowed them whole as they moved deeper into its heart. A battle-hardened human and a petite, mystical alien woman. An unlikely duo in the most dangerous jungle in the galaxy. And somewhere in the darkness, the night hunters waited. The jungle was alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, distant roars, shrill cries, and the rustling of trees that seemed to whisper secrets in a language Mike couldn't begin to understand. As he and Na moved deeper into the verdant labyrinth, the oppressive humidity and darkness pressed in on him. The soft glow of Na's blue skin illuminated their path, casting an ethereal light on the underbrush. For a moment, it felt like they were the last 2 souls alive in a world forgotten by time. "How much farther?" Mike asked, his voice hushed. The thick jungle canopy above them seemed to pulse with the hum of unseen life. Na glanced over her shoulder at him, her silvery eyes gleaming in the dark. "Close. But we must be cautious now. The spirit beasts are restless. They can feel the raiders' anger stirring." She reached out, her fingers brushing a low-hanging vine, which immediately shifted and curled back as if it had a life of its own. Mike had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. He'd tracked poachers on Earth, hunted through alien deserts, and even survived a few brawls in spaceport cantinas. But here, in this strange, mystic jungle, there was something unsettling, something alive in the very air around him. As they continued forward, Na's pace slowed. She seemed to be listening to something, her head tilting slightly as she closed her eyes. "What's going on?" Mike whispered, looking around nervously. His hand instinctively hovered near his rifle. Na's eyes flickered open, her gaze intense and distant. "The spirits are warning me. We are not alone." She stopped, holding a hand out to Mike to signal him to be silent. Mike immediately dropped to a crouch, his pulse quickening. His mind raced through combat scenarios, but there was nothing in his training that could prepare him for whatever this was. Not a sound, not a movement, betrayed the source of her concern. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, followed by an earth-shattering roar that made the trees shudder. Mike felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "Tara," Na whispered, stepping forward. "She is coming." Out of the shadows, the massive creature from earlier, Tara, Na's spirit beast, emerged from the darkness, her iridescent scales shimmering in the dim light. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto Mike, and for a moment he felt like a fly caught in a predator's gaze. But instead of attacking, Tara lowered her massive head, nuzzling Na gently. "She's the one who's been following us," Na explained, stroking the beast's scaled hide. "She senses danger and protects me. I can control her, but she also has her own will. We share a bond." Mike took a cautious step forward, mesmerized by the sheer size and power of Tara. "I've never seen anything like her. Does she actually listen to you?" Na smiled, her expression softening. "I call upon the spirits, and they guide me. Tara is one of those spirits. She has her own thoughts, her own purpose, but she listens because we are connected." Mike's mind raced. Spirit beasts? Connected by spirits? It was all a bit much to process, even for someone who'd seen his fair share of alien cultures. He'd known warriors who rode strange beasts, but this was something different entirely. The distant sound of voices, shouted commands, pulled him back to the present. "The raiders. They're getting closer." Na nodded, her face hardening. "We must make it to the village before they find us. But first, I have a trial for you." "A trial?" Mike repeated, his brow furrowing. "For what?" "To see if you are worthy," she said simply. "I cannot take just anyone to my village. The spirits demand a test." She gestured to the dense jungle around them. "The night hunters will come, and you will face them." Mike's pulse quickened. "Wait, hold on. You want me to fight night hunters? I've got a rifle, but I'm not sure that'll help much against whatever they are." Na smiled faintly, her silver eyes gleaming. "You will not be fighting them. You will be proving your worth in a different way. Come with me." Without waiting for his response, Na turned and began walking swiftly toward a shadowy part of the jungle. Tara followed close behind, her massive body moving soundlessly through the underbrush. Mike hesitated for a moment, then fell in step behind her, his mind still buzzing with questions. As they traveled deeper, the sounds of the jungle grew more ominous. The usual rustling was replaced by something watchful. The trees themselves seemed to stretch higher into the sky, and the air grew colder. The temperature drop was unsettling, as though the jungle itself had taken notice of their intrusion. Eventually, they reached a clearing. The ground was smooth and flat, and in the center, a stone circle lay. At first, Mike thought it was a natural formation, but as they approached, he saw the faint markings etched into the stones. Ancient symbols, worn by time, but still radiating power. "This is the place," Na said, her voice calm but firm. She stopped at the edge of the circle, turning to face Mike. "Here, you will meet the night hunters. They are the spirits of the jungle, bound to it by ancient rites. You must prove you have the courage to stand before them, to be worthy of the village's protection." Mike looked around, trying to sense any movement, but everything was eerily still. "I'm guessing they're not going to just waltz in and introduce themselves, right?" Na's lips twitched, a faint smile on her face. "No, they will test you, just as I will. Do not fear them. They can sense weakness, and they will feed on it. Trust yourself. Trust the spirits." Before he could reply, Na raised her arms to the sky, her silvery eyes closing in concentration. The air seemed to thicken as a low hum filled the clearing. Mike's hand instinctively went to his rifle again, his fingers tightening around the grip, but Na held up a hand. "Not yet," she whispered. "You must show them who you are first. The night hunters do not respect weapons. They respect spirit." The ground began to shake once again, the tremors more pronounced now. A series of high-pitched howls echoed through the jungle, sending a chill down Mike's spine. Suddenly, shapes began to appear in the shadows, sleek, ghostly figures with glowing eyes, their bodies outlined in shimmering silver light. The night hunters. Mike stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The creatures were ghostly, silent, and haunting, like nothing he had ever seen before. They moved through the trees as if they were part of the very jungle itself, their eyes fixed on him. Then Na stepped forward, her voice a steady whisper. "Do not move. Do not show fear. Let them come to you." The night hunters circled closer, their glowing eyes studying Mike as if sizing him up. For a moment, he thought his heart would leap out of his chest, but he forced himself to stay still, focusing on Na's words. "Trust yourself." As the creatures closed in, Mike felt the strangest sensation wash over him. A tingle of awareness, a deep connection with the earth beneath his feet. He wasn't sure where it came from, but he knew it wasn't just his imagination. There was something in the air, something beyond the physical realm. The night hunters were not just beasts, they were spirits. Na's voice echoed softly in his mind. "Let go, Mike. Feel the pulse of the jungle. Let them know you are not afraid." The creatures stopped, their eyes glowing brighter for a heartbeat before they slowly began to retreat, fading back into the shadows. Mike exhaled slowly, feeling a strange calm wash over him. He wasn't sure how he had done it, but something had shifted. He had stood his ground. Na turned to him, her face unreadable. "Well done, human." Mike blinked, still processing the surreal moment. I think I passed." She nodded. "You are worthy of the trial. But this is just the beginning. The raiders will come soon. We must prepare." Mike looked around, finally allowing himself a breath of relief. But in the back of his mind, he knew the real battle had only just begun. The moment the night hunters disappeared into the jungle, a heavy silence settled over the clearing. The air felt dense with the aftermath of what had just transpired, the pulse of the spirits still lingering in the air like the hum of a distant storm. Mike stood there, trying to steady his breathing, his eyes scanning the shadows where the creatures had vanished. "That was unreal," Mike muttered to himself, his mind racing to process the encounter. He had faced hostile creatures before, but nothing like that, nothing so alive and ancient. Na, seemingly unaffected, was already moving toward the edge of the clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon. "It is not over," she said quietly. "The raiders are close. The spirits have not finished with you yet." Mike followed her, his hand still gripping his rifle. He had learned the hard way that in situations like this, being too confident could lead to mistakes. He wasn't sure what kind of test the spirits had just put him through, but he knew one thing for sure. The real threat was still coming. "How far out are they?" he asked, his eyes shifting between the trees as he tried to gauge the danger. Na's silver eyes glinted with a mixture of focus and calm. "Not far. They have been following us since we left the village. They will attack at first light." Mike cursed under his breath. "We don't have much time, then. We need to get to your village, now." Na nodded, but there was something in her expression, a flicker of hesitation. "The village will not protect you from them. Not unless you are truly ready. You must prove yourself once more." The spirits demanded. Mike shook his head, incredulous. "I just faced the night hunters. That was the test, right? What else do you want from me?" "This is not about the spirits, Mike. This is about you. The raiders do not simply attack with weapons. They attack your mind, your heart. They will try to break you before you even see them." A chill ran down Mike's spine. It was a threat unlike any he had faced before. Raiders, sure. He'd dealt with mercenaries and pirates, smugglers and bounty hunters. Individuals who thrived on fear, chaos, and destruction. But this sounded different. It sounded personal. Na continued, her voice growing softer. "They can smell fear, Mike. but they are also attracted to desperation. You must rid yourself of it, or you will be lost before the battle even begins. Mike felt his grip on the rifle tighten. He wasn't exactly sure what Na meant, but the implication was clear. This wasn't going to be a fight he could win with firepower alone. "We'll do it your way then," Mike said, his voice steadying. "What's the next step?" Na turned and began walking toward the dense jungle again, Tara following closely behind. Mike followed, his senses on high alert. The sounds of the jungle had changed. What had once been a cacophony of rustling leaves and animal calls was now eerily silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. "You must clear your mind," Na said, her voice cutting through the quiet. "When the raiders come, they will use fear to disorient you. You must be strong in your heart and your mind. Trust in your will, and the spirits will help you." Mike didn't reply. He didn't know how to clear his mind, especially not now. His thoughts were a whirlwind of questions. About Na, about the raiders, about the spirits, and about how the hell he was going to survive the coming battle. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the trees began to thin, and the ground beneath their feet grew softer, as though they were approaching a place where nature itself had settled into a peaceful stillness. Eventually, they reached a small, almost hidden enclave, a secluded valley that seemed untouched by time. "This is where we will make our stand," Na said, gesturing toward the narrow clearing ahead. In the center of the valley stood a small stone temple, its surface worn with age, but still radiating a sense of power. The stone walls were covered in symbols that Mike could feel but not fully understand, their energy almost palpable. Na turned to Mike and placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is the last part of your trial," she said, her voice quieter now, almost reverent. "The spirits have guided you this far, but only you can call upon them in your time of need." Mike looked at her, a question forming on his lips. But before he could speak, she turned and walked toward the temple, her steps measured and deliberate. Tara followed close behind her, the great beast's glowing eyes fixated on the stone doorway. Mike hesitated for a moment, his mind racing, but then he followed, the weight of the rifle at his side grounding him in the present moment. The temple's entrance was low, its stone door barely wide enough for him to slip through without ducking. Inside, the space was surprisingly open, the walls adorned with carvings of strange, alien creatures, some of which Mike recognized from his earlier visions of the Night Hunters. "This is where the ritual will take place," Na said, her voice a whisper. "You must stand here and wait. The spirits will know when you are ready. But remember, when the raiders come, they will not be what you expect." Mike frowned. "What does that mean? If I need to fight, I'll fight. I've been through worse before." Na's gaze softened, but there was a sadness to it. "The raiders do not just come for blood, Mike. They come for souls." She stepped closer, her voice lowering even further. "They will try to make you doubt yourself. They will prey on your weaknesses, your deepest fears. If you let them, they will consume you. It is not just your body they will seek, but your spirit." Mike's breath caught in his throat. The weight of her words settled on him, heavy and cold. He had faced danger before, yes, but this was something else entirely. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, felt clouded with uncertainty. "You are ready, Mike," Na said firmly. "The spirits have spoken. You have passed the first test, but the second will be harder. Only by facing the truth inside can you defeat them. Only by confronting your own fears." Mike's hand subconsciously tightened around the rifle again. His own fears? What did she mean by that? He had fears, sure. Everyone did. But the thought of confronting them head-on, of laying bare his insecurities and doubts, it was a daunting idea. "How do I do that?" he asked, his voice strained. "How do I fight something that I can't even see?" Na smiled, a glint of pride in her eyes. "You fight it with the strength of your heart. With your will. You will face yourself, Mike. The raiders will force you to confront the one thing you fear most. And only by accepting that fear, by not letting it control you, can you defeat them." Mike nodded slowly, his stomach tightening. He wasn't sure he could do this. But for Na, for the spirits, and for the village he hadn't yet seen, he had to try. And then, as if on cue, a distant howl echoed through the jungle, a sound that made his blood run cold. The raiders had arrived. The howl that echoed through the jungle was not like any animal Mike had ever heard. It wasn't the call of a predator on the hunt. It wasn't a warning cry, or even the sound of something desperate. No, this sound was different. It was a low, menacing growl that resonated deep in his chest, a promise of what was to come. Mike's hand shot to his rifle instinctively, but he didn't take it off safety. Not yet. His breath came in shallow gasps as he turned to Na. She stood still, her silver eyes glowing faintly, the only light in the shadowed temple. Her expression was unreadable, but Mike could see the tension in her posture. She wasn't afraid, but she was prepared. For what exactly, he wasn't sure. "They're here," Na said softly, her voice almost lost in the thick air. "The spirits will guide you, but you must stand firm. Do not look away from them, not even for a second." Mike swallowed, trying to steady his nerves. He was used to combat. He was used to the sound of blasters, the clash of weapons, the blood-pumping adrenaline of battle. But this felt different. It felt personal. The raiders were not just after his body. They were coming for something deeper. And nah, she wasn't just a guide. She was a test. Another howl echoed, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps through the underbrush. Mike's eyes flicked to the trees surrounding the temple. Shadows danced, twisting unnaturally, as if something was moving just beyond the edge of the light. "Stay calm. Focus." Mike repeated the mantra in his mind, like the thousands of times before when he'd found himself staring death in the face. He wasn't about to be shaken now. "Are you ready?" Na's voice cut through his thoughts. It was calm, almost detached. Mike nodded. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be." He stepped forward, positioning himself in front of the temple entrance. His grip on the rifle tightened, but his eyes never strayed from the jungle beyond. He couldn't afford to flinch. He couldn't let fear control him. "You cannot fight them with firepower alone," Na said, her voice no longer distant, but sharp. "They will break you if you do. You must fight with your will." Mike's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he wasn't here for some spiritual test, that he didn't believe in spirits or some otherworldly power. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he kept his focus on the dark woods ahead. He had no choice but to play along. The first raider appeared from the trees. A hulking figure, taller than Mike by at least a foot, with bioluminescent scales shimmering in the fading light. It was one of the Crashin raiders, the ones Mike had seen earlier. This one was bigger, more menacing, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through him. Its breath came in ragged, guttural gasps, as if it had been waiting for this moment, savoring it. It stepped into the clearing, its claws scraping against the ground. It was followed by two others, just as large, just as terrifying. But there was something else about them. Something off. The way they moved, the way they shifted in the shadows, it was almost as though they weren't entirely there. Mike's pulse quickened. This was not just a physical fight. It was a battle of will, a battle for his mind. He could feel it. The air around him seemed to thicken, pushing against him, pulling at his thoughts. It was as if the jungle itself was alive, trying to suffocate him. "Do not fear," Na whispered. Her voice was a soft echo, but Mike heard it clearly in the back of his mind. "Focus on the spirit within you. Face them, or they will consume you." Mike took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what to expect next, but he knew that this wasn't going to be like any battle he'd ever fought. The first raider snarled, its sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight. It lunged at Mike, claws outstretched. Time slowed. Mike's instincts kicked in, and he fired. The blast rang out, cutting through the night like a thunderclap, but the Crashin didn't flinch. The shot went wide, missing its target by inches. Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to recalibrate, but the raider was already on him. It swiped at him with a claw, too fast for him to react. Mike ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike, and rolled to the side, coming up into a crouch. The second raider moved in, its massive form blocking the only way out. "You cannot escape," the raider growled, its voice like grinding stone. Mike's hand tightened on the rifle, but it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. His heart was racing, his breath coming in gasps. His mind was a whirlwind of panic. The jungle. The raiders. the spirits, the test. He couldn't focus. He couldn't think. And that was when it hit him. The fear, the real enemy, wasn't the raiders. It wasn't the massive, menacing creatures closing in on him. It was the suffocating feeling in his chest, the swirling panic, the self-doubt creeping up from the darkest corners of his mind. He had been afraid of failure, afraid of not being good enough, afraid that he would never find a place where he belonged. And now, he was afraid that he would never escape this jungle alive. But then he remembered Na's words. Face your fear. Mike closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath, and suddenly it clicked. The fear wasn't something to fight. It was something to accept, to use. He opened his eyes, looking directly at the closest raider. It was close enough now that Mike could see the venomous glow in its eyes. The other two were closing in, but Mike didn't move. He stood tall. He stood firm. The raider lunged again, and Mike met it head-on. Not with the rifle, not with his weapons. With his will. He stepped aside, just enough for the massive claws to swipe past him. His rifle came up in one fluid motion, a clean shot to the raider's chest. It dropped like a stone. The second raider hesitated, confused by the sudden shift in Mike's demeanor. Mike turned his gaze to the remaining two, no longer afraid. He was ready. I'm not your prey, Mike said, his voice steady, and I'm not going anywhere. The battle was far from over. But Mike had found his center. He wasn't just a human caught in a test. He was a fighter, a survivor. And he would prove it.